So a lot of people were really unhappy with my Men review. Now, to some extent, I understand. I personally was rooting for Alex Garland to be a savior of the filmmaking industry. He had a very distinct visual style, he was interesting, he wasn't just making the same movies that everybody else was making. Even though Annihilation was flawed, and you saw the echo of certain tropes that were coming out of some of his movies, you still rooted for him. You still were interested in what he had to say as a filmmaker. And you would still at least like to look at his movies. Then there's Men. Now the thing was that as I was reading through the comments and I saw the ratio of dislikes, it was this ironically effeminate response. I didn't see a whole lot of countering the things that I had to say about the movie. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, what I thought about Men was that it lost its character and emotional tension pretty early in the movie when it gave up the pretense of pretending that it was an actual story that was representative of a metaphor, and just pretty much went headfirst with the whole metaphor thing and didn't care otherwise. So then you lose interest as a viewer and don't care so much what happens. It's just then this sterile evaluation of whatever the thematic ideas are that are going on behind the story, and there wasn't much to that either. So at the end of the day, it seemed like it was more a naked propaganda piece instead of an actual work of art or something of interest. So that was my final verdict on what Men was. And so it's clear, don't get me wrong, I would rather people make the attempt and end up with these cinematic abortions than churn out a lot of the schlock that we see nowadays. But there are movies that do this kind of thing really well and can maintain all the strands of storytelling and intrigue and rewatchability and complexity. They can maintain all these things at once without losing anything when it comes to art or filmmaking in general. One movie that, and I can't remember if I mentioned it in the actual review, but I'll mention it here and support my thesis, is There Will Be Blood by Paul Thomas Anderson. So There Will Be Blood, it's based on a book, Oil, and a lot of things were changed. I read the book a couple of times, and I've seen the movie several times, and a lot of things were changed. But the point of There Will Be Blood is that on the surface, it just looks like it's about Daniel Plainview, who is a prospector and is searching for oil in the American West to try to make a fortune, and so it's this American story. And the point is that he overcomes the things in front of him and is wildly successful, and that's the story. So on the surface, it works just plot-wise. But what it really represents, and the thematic through line, the representations that it uses, all this stuff makes sense. So what it really represents is the conflict between the burgeoning power of capitalism and the waning power of religion. So you'll see it throughout the entire movie, how the classical sources of authority and the things that people held most dear, so things like family and religion, these are undermined thematically as Daniel Plainview ascends. So one thing that you'll notice, you have his primary antagonist throughout the entire movie is played by Paul Dano, and he plays this priest character who's very charismatic and has the ear of the town that Daniel is trying to get, rights to their oil. And so he has to ingratiate himself to this religious, charismatic leader until the end, where he's powerful enough that he doesn't have to do that anymore. And so throughout the entire movie, the point is that Daniel has this really suspicious posture toward the religious person. He's questioning, are you really sincere about the things that you're saying and the things that you're representing? Or are you as vacuous and hollow as I am? And has this been the foundation of civilization all the way up until now? And this is underscored by the fact that all the family that Daniel has throughout the movie is fake family. So he has the one kid that he inherits because one of his men dies, and then he uses the kid to gain favor when he's trying to get these contracts, these oil contracts. And then later he has a brother, a long-lost brother who comes out of nowhere. And initially he's happy about this and involves him in the business, and he likes having somebody else who is part of this, and then finds out that the guy was actually lying. He made it up. He just found some information about Daniel at some point and decided he was going to come here and pretend he was his brother so that he could benefit from it. So it's all false family. So all the things that used to be the guarantors of morality and safety and structure and security and all those that were historically the case, those are being questioned and challenged by just this coldness that's coming out of the rise of capitalism. So you have that, you have the basic plot structure that's going on, that's Daniel trying to get these contracts and running into these impediments, being injured and convincing this person, that person, making tons of money, caring for his fake son and being questioned all over the place. But all of this makes sense on every level as you're going through the entire story, and that's why it works. That's why it works so well, and there's complexity in each one of the characters, there's complexity in the ideas, in the context, everything else. That's why that's a good movie, see? And then you have other movies that are not good movies, like Men, that cannot manage that many things at one time, that don't have the capacity or understanding or complexity to be able to do that. Another movie, a more recent example, is like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, Quentin Tarantino, I remember he had some interview where he talked to Oliver Stone, and Oliver Stone's one to talk, but he said that Quentin Tarantino, something to the effect of he's not a real filmmaker, you know, he's not a real artist. He makes entertainment, but Oliver Stone makes things that are important. So Tarantino, his earlier movies, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, these are not, even though they are fantastic pieces of entertainment, fantastic movies when it comes to a filmmaking perspective, they don't have the thematic complexity that works of art in the medium do until he got to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's when he broke out, and that's what I mean again with the metaphor, being able to hold metaphors and storytelling at the same time. So on the surface, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is just about this actor who is going into the downslope of his career. He had a few big action roles, and he has a stuntman friend, and both of them rely on this. But he's hitting the end of his career and not able to get the kinds of roles that he did before. So he's dealing with this problem and trying to find success in this morass. And then the stuntman, played by Brad Pitt, is a little more passive in this way, in that he's trying to take care of his charge of his primary breadwinner in Leo DiCaprio. He's trying to do his best to support him and do the job that he's always done and be that stuntman as he sees his friend and guarantor backsliding. And this is all within the context of the Manson murders and how those impacted this community and the country and the world at the time. So on the surface, you've got this basic story, and Leo DiCaprio, he's got a number of things going on where he's got this role where he plays the heavy, he's playing the bad guy, and an incredible scene. I was blown away by the scene when I saw it in theaters, where the entire scene is a fake scene in a fake movie within this movie, and the whole setup of the entire scene is just for him to mess up a line at one point and then get pissed off. It was like, you'll never see anything like that again. It was until we have a filmmaking renaissance. But it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful to get to that. Anyway, you've got this surface level story that makes perfect sense, and you've got the hippies played by all the girls with the feet, and what's her name, Margaret Qualley. And so there's this contrast of the Hollywood elites and what they care about, and what the hippies are going through and what they care about. And there's this alternate history wherein Manson is unsuccessful in the horrendous attack on Sharon Tate. So you've got all that surface stuff going on, and it's a fine story just watching it on that surface level. But in reality, again, there's this thematic and metaphorical through line that you can absolutely see in the movie, where you have Leo DiCaprio. He's representative of the fading masculinity, the fake masculinity that you see on the rise in America. He's the one who pretends to be the tough guy on the screen, and he fundamentally is doing worse. And then you have the real guy who's unheralded, who's not celebrated, and that's Brad Pitt's character, who is the stuntman. He is the tough guy. He's the guy who has the actual masculinity. That's why he's shot and put in positions where it's demonstrative of his masculinity. So it'll be like he's on the roof and he takes his shirt off and he throws a smoke in his mouth, and he's the one who does the driving. And he's the primary person at the end. Spoilers. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but spoilers at the end. He's the one who engages in most of the violence at the end of the movie. Where his counterpart in Leo DiCaprio, he's the one who does the ostentatious violent thing, but it's at the end, and he gets the credit for it once he walks off the set, the real life set. But it's this idea of, okay, the fake masculine and the real masculine, and how the death of that real masculinity and that real masculinity not getting the same recognition that it used to get is a harbinger of the death of the innocence of America. And that's what the Sharon Tate murders really meant. Fundamentally, that's what it really meant in a larger scale, is that once that happened, it was the death of innocence. Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, and this darling wife of a great director and an actress, and supposedly safe and healthy, and the aspirational thing that so many people wanted to be, just murdered for no reason. You know, it wasn't like she got wrapped up in some activism or it was a robbery or anything like that. It was just a horrible, senseless murder by some lunatics, and it murdered also the innocence of the country at the time. And that was a precursor to so many things that went horribly awry after that. So again, that's another movie that is able to manage the surface level character and story structure and keeping that tension and keeping all of those things fundamentally correct and true, while also being able to work in thematics that deal with, you know, men and innocence and Hollywood and a bunch of other complex ideas. So obviously anybody who saw the review related to Men is probably a skewed sample. People, you know, it's not like people who had no interest in the movie, didn't see the movie, are the ones who are more likely to look it up. It's people who have seen the movie and more likely ones who liked the movie after they saw it and want to think more about it or talk more about it. Those are the ones who are going to look it up most likely. So I understand it's a skewed sample, but I just really want people to think about what these things actually mean. There was a time where I looked at movies and I would just look at them in a vacuum and say, okay, is it good or is it bad art? I can look at it just in that fashion and not have to think of it in any other way. But I think that especially today is a childish way to look at movies within the context of a culture. And Men is representative of something that is a decaying, toxic aspect of the culture that doesn't have an interest in complexity or philosophy or vital civilization building ideas. It has a very superficial interest in a very narrow political idea that it's presenting on screen. That's all it's doing. So watch movies and think more complexly about what films are supposed to be. Watch There Will Be Blood, watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or No Country for Old Men. Anomalisa is another one. Enemy is, if you don't mind the slow burn, Enemy is another one. Watch movies that really expand the idea of what the medium can do and what people are and what people are capable of being and where we've been. Not ones that narrow things down to some parochial slideshow about regurgitating the things that people are supposed to say nowadays. Now, somebody in the comments said something about how the atmosphere of Men was good, and there were other movies that had a similar atmosphere, and that was enjoyable. And I don't begrudge them that. I think they're right in that regard, that a lot of times atmospherically, Alex Garland does a very good job, and some movies can atmospherically be very enjoyable to watch, even if they don't have the substance behind it. So that's fine. But I do think that people need to be more discerning and intelligent in the kinds of works that they praise and the kinds of works that they decry. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to get that out related to, because there was quite the backlash when it came to the Men review. And again, if anybody wants to actually discuss the merits of what I said or defend the movie on a more fundamental basis or tell me something that I missed, then I'm almost certain that you're wrong, but I could. It would be a very rare occasion this happens, but I could be wrong. And I would actually love to hear it, because at the end of the day, I just love talking more substantively about things that are worth talking about instead of, you know, all the same nonsense that people talk about nowadays. So regardless, I appreciate it. Everybody who commented, disliked, liked, whatever. I appreciate it, and I hope all is well. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.